Wait, stop scrolling for just a moment. What if everything you believed about Hollywood's golden age was carefully constructed fiction? The glamorous premieres, the sparkling smiles, the promise that dreams really do come true if you just work hard enough. You believed those stories, didn't you? Now I'm going to reveal something Hollywood has spent nearly a century trying to bury beneath layers of publicity photos and studio-approved press releases. Between 1922 and 1981, 10 deaths occurred in Hollywood that authorities either couldn't solve or closed far too quickly. Some cases involve forensic evidence that disappeared. Others feature witness statements that changed multiple times. A few contain medical findings that don't align with official conclusions. These aren't conspiracy theories written by people with too much time on their hands. These are documented cases with police reports, autopsy records, and investigative files that remain open or unresolved to this day. You know about the red carpets and the Oscar speeches. You've seen the classic films that defined American cinema. But behind those studio gates, something else was happening. Deaths that generated more questions than answers. Investigations that seemed to end before they really began. Evidence that vanished before it could be properly examined. And families who spent decades insisting the official story couldn't possibly be true. This isn't entertainment. This is history that was never properly resolved. 10 cases, 10 people who came to Hollywood with dreams, 10 endings that still don't make complete sense, even after all these years. The final story will send a chill through you because it shows just how quickly the machinery of fame can determine what becomes accepted truth and what gets buried forever. But before we examine the first case, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your support helps ensure they stay in public memory where they belong. The year 1947 began like any other in Los Angeles. The war was over, soldiers had returned home, and young women arrived daily at Union Station hoping to become the next big star. Elizabeth Short was one of them. She was 22 years old, with striking dark hair and pale skin that made her stand out in crowds. She spent her days making the rounds to casting offices, waiting in lobbies for opportunities that rarely materialized, and her nights at nightclubs where industry people gathered. Friends who knew her described her as sweet, ambitious, and perhaps dangerously trusting. She had no significant acting credits to her name, but she had something more important in Hollywood: hope and the kind of beauty that turned heads. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a woman named Betty Bersinger was walking through the Leimert Park neighborhood with her young daughter. She noticed something unusual in a vacant lot on Norton Avenue. What she initially thought might be a discarded mannequin turned out to be Elizabeth Short. The young woman had passed away, and the circumstances immediately indicated this was no ordinary case. Medical professionals who arrived noted certain aspects suggested someone with specialized knowledge, possibly medical training. The investigation that followed became one of the largest in Los Angeles history. More than 150 individuals were questioned over the following weeks and months. Dozens of people came forward with various claims, though none of their stories aligned with the actual evidence. The tips flooded in by the thousands, each requiring valuable investigative time, many proving to be dead ends or attention seekers. The newspapers quickly assigned her a nickname based on her preference for dark clothing and a recently released film noir. The case generated front-page coverage for 35 consecutive days straight, an unprecedented media frenzy. Letters arrived at newspaper offices, some crafted from cut-out magazine letters in a style reminiscent of ransom notes. One package claimed to contain some of her belongings, and it did: her address book and birth certificate, mailed after being cleaned with gasoline. Police worked hundreds of leads that went nowhere. Theories emerged about connections to other unsolved cases in the area, but nothing could be definitively proven. Individuals were brought in for questioning and released. Witnesses were interviewed and re-interviewed multiple times. No arrest was ever made. The investigation eventually grew cold as leads dried up and the public's attention shifted to newer stories. In 1949, a grand jury was convened to examine how the case had been handled by police. They found no evidence of misconduct, but also no resolution to offer the public. Decades later, various investigators, authors, and researchers have presented theories about potential suspects, including medical professionals and acquaintances. Some theories have gained traction in popular culture, but no official charges have ever been filed against anyone. What remains most unclear is why someone with apparent specialized knowledge would have acted with such calculation and then chosen such a public location. The level of planning and preparation suggests significant premeditation, yet the placement seems almost designed to generate maximum attention and outrage. These contradictions have never been satisfactorily explained, even after more than 7 decades of investigation and research. By 1959, George Reeves had become a household name, someone children across America recognized instantly. For 6 years, he had portrayed a heroic character who could stop danger, leap tall buildings in a single bound, and always saved innocent people. The television series had made him famous, but that fame came with severe limitations. At 45 years old, Reeves found himself typecast in the strictest sense. Casting directors couldn't see past the costume and the persona. He was desperate for other roles, for a chance to demonstrate his range as an actor, but doors kept closing. Still, plans were underway for new episodes of his famous show, contracts had been signed, and production was scheduled to resume in just a few weeks. His career, while limited, appeared financially stable. On the night of June 15, 1959, Reeves hosted a small gathering at his home in Benedict Canyon. His fiancée, Leonore Lemon, and several guests were present for what should have been a casual evening. According to witness statements given to police, Reeves retired to his bedroom around midnight, visibly frustrated by the noise level downstairs and complaining of exhaustion. What happened next depends entirely on whose account you examine, and those accounts vary significantly. Some people present that evening later reported hearing Leonore make unusual statements before the fatal moment, predicting what was about to occur in a way that struck some as eerily prescient. Others recalled completely different sequences of events with timelines that didn't quite align. At some point after Reeves went upstairs to his bedroom, a sound was heard. When someone finally decided to investigate after a delay that witnesses couldn't adequately explain, a tragic scene was discovered. The official determination came with remarkable swiftness. Within just a few hours, local authorities made their classification, and the investigation effectively concluded almost immediately. However, certain documented details raised serious questions that were never adequately addressed by investigators. Physical evidence raised questions during the examination, though testing wasn't standard procedure at that time. The circumstances bore unusual aspects that struck some observers as noteworthy. The witnesses present provided inconsistent accounts of the evening's events, with stories that changed in subtle but significant ways. There were unexplained marks that seemed to warrant closer examination and explanation. Perhaps most puzzling was the significant time gap between the incident and when authorities were actually contacted, a delay that struck many observers as highly unusual for such an urgent situation. Reeves's mother absolutely refused to accept the official conclusion and hired a prominent attorney to conduct an independent investigation. This attorney initially appeared genuinely committed to examining the evidence more thoroughly and challenging the rushed official narrative. However, he withdrew from the case quite suddenly for reasons that were never made public, leading to speculation about pressure or influence. A second official examination conducted months later simply confirmed the initial findings without addressing the outstanding questions. Yet the questions persisted and grew. If Reeves had genuinely been planning such an act, why had he just signed contracts for another season? Why would someone making such a decision be committing to professional obligations? Why were there those unexplained marks that suggested something more? Why did witness accounts vary so significantly and sometimes contradictorily? The circumstances of Reeves's personal life added layers of complexity. He had recently ended a long-term relationship with Toni Mannix, a woman whose husband, Eddie Mannix, held considerable power and influence in the film industry. Toni had provided substantial financial support to Reeves and had even purchased the house. When Reeves became engaged to the much younger Leonore Lemon, his relationship with Toni ended badly, with multiple reports of confrontations and difficult interactions. Some investigators and observers have speculated this created relevant tensions that might have played a role. Others have suggested the new fiancé might have had financial considerations, as she stood to benefit from Reeves's estate. Still others maintain that Reeves, facing career disappointment, typecasting frustration, and personal relationship turmoil, simply made a tragic and irreversible decision in a moment of despair. What remains completely undisputed is that the investigation concluded with unusual and suspicious quickness. Despite the questions, despite the inconsistencies, despite the unexplained aspects, the case was never reopened and remains officially closed to this day. Thelma Todd made audiences across America laugh throughout the early 1930s. She appeared in dozens of successful comedy films, often playing the sophisticated, glamorous woman who delivered perfectly timed jokes with impeccable comic timing. By 1935, she had successfully transitioned from purely acting into the business side of entertainment, co-owning a popular and profitable restaurant and nightclub called Thelma Todd Sidewalk Cafe on the Pacific Coast Highway in Pacific Palisades. But beneath the public success, her personal life contained serious complications and mounting pressures. She had recently ended a difficult and contentious relationship with a man named Roland West, a director who was described by those who knew him as possessive, controlling, and prone to jealousy. She was also reportedly facing increasing pressure from individuals with known underworld connections who wanted to use her establishment for certain activities, purposes she was actively resisting despite intimidation. On the morning of December 16, 1935, Todd was discovered inside her car, which was parked inside a closed garage located above her restaurant. The engine was still running when she was found. The circumstances were determined to be related to carbon monoxide, and the case was officially classified as accidental. The prevailing theory offered by investigators was that Todd, after attending a party the previous night, had started her car to warm it up in the cold garage and subsequently lost consciousness before she could exit the enclosed space. However, several aspects of the scene and circumstances generated ongoing speculation that has persisted for nearly 90 years. Todd had definitely been seen at a party the previous evening, but witness accounts differed significantly regarding her condition, her mood, and her stated intentions. There were visible marks on her that some medical professionals believed warranted much closer examination and couldn't easily be explained by the official scenario. Her clothing was described in police reports as disheveled and disarranged in ways that seemed inconsistent with someone who had simply sat in a car and become unconscious. The garage itself was located up a steep and significant flight of outdoor stairs, approximately 270 steps from street level, and investigators questioned why she would have made such a difficult climb to reach her car given other available options. Todd had reportedly been receiving explicit warnings from individuals connected to certain circles who wanted her to allow particular activities at her establishment, messages that friends confirmed she had shared with them. There were also serious questions raised about her ex-partner Roland West's whereabouts that evening and his behavior in the days following. The investigation into alternative scenarios was minimal. Despite these various concerning threads and unanswered questions, the case was resolved remarkably quickly and has remained officially closed ever since. Some researchers and authors who have examined the available evidence argue strenuously that it doesn't fully support an accidental scenario. Others maintain that Todd, perhaps heavily intoxicated and disoriented in the early morning hours, made a fatal error in judgment. The grand jury that reviewed the case found the evidence ambiguous, but didn't demand further investigation. Certain connections were mentioned, but never thoroughly pursued. West was questioned, but never charged. The questions have persisted for nearly 90 years, but the official conclusion has never changed. Bob Crane achieved widespread fame and recognition playing Colonel Hogan, a character who managed to find humor and hope, even in difficult circumstances, in a popular sitcom set during wartime. By 1978, his groundbreaking show had been off the air for several years, but Crane was still working regularly, performing in dinner theater productions across the country to maintain his income and public visibility. On June 29, 1978, he was in Scottsdale, Arizona, performing in a stage play production of a popular comedy. That morning, a colleague and cast member went to Crane's apartment for a previously scheduled lunch appointment. When Crane didn't answer repeated knocking, the increasingly concerned colleague used a key to enter and discovered that something terrible had occurred. The investigation that followed revealed that Crane had been living a private life that was dramatically and significantly different from his wholesome public persona. Investigators found extensive materials and equipment suggesting he had been obsessively documenting intimate encounters with various women, creating photographs and video recordings. A friend named John Carpenter, who had introduced Crane to video recording technology and had become his frequent companion, immediately became a person of significant interest, particularly after he abruptly left Arizona around the exact time without clear explanation. However, the case went frustratingly cold for over a decade due to lack of conclusive physical evidence linking Carpenter to the scene. The investigation stalled repeatedly. In 1990, significant advances in forensic technology and renewed interest from prosecutors led authorities to formally charge John Carpenter. The evidence presented at trial included biological material that had been found in a rental car Carpenter had been driving, though this material had degraded significantly over the intervening 12 years, and its probative value was questionable. Defense attorneys argued forcefully that the testing was scientifically inconclusive and unreliable. Carpenter maintained his complete innocence throughout, claiming that while he and Crane had argued heatedly the night before about Crane's lifestyle and Carpenter's enabling role in it, he had left the apartment with Crane alive and departed Arizona because their friendship had definitively ended. The trial, which drew significant media attention, concluded with a complete acquittal. The jury determined that the prosecution simply hadn't presented sufficient credible evidence to establish responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. Following the trial and acquittal, the case was not actively reinvestigated by authorities despite remaining technically open. Crane's family members, including his children from multiple marriages, have expressed widely varying opinions about what actually happened. Some remain utterly convinced that Carpenter was responsible despite the acquittal and believe justice was denied. Others acknowledge more pragmatically that without conclusive physical evidence, absolute certainty about what occurred is simply impossible. What cannot be disputed is this: someone entered Bob Crane's apartment in the early morning hours of June 29, 1978, and something tragic occurred. Whether that person was John Carpenter, who was tried and acquitted by a jury of his peers, or someone else entirely who has never been identified, has never been definitively established by any court or investigation. Georgette Bauerdorf came from substantial wealth and privilege. Her family's extensive oil fortune meant she never needed to work a single day in her life for financial security. But in 1944, at just 20 years old, she chose to volunteer at the famous Hollywood Canteen, a club where service members on leave from World War II could socialize, dance, eat, and momentarily forget the war. She lived alone in a modest apartment on Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood, a choice that gave her independence from her wealthy family. On the night of October 11, 1944, she was there by herself, as she often was. The next morning, circumstances indicated something terrible had occurred. The official determination pointed to a tragic outcome, but the circumstances surrounding what happened clearly indicated this was absolutely not an accident or natural occurrence. There were obvious signs throughout the small apartment that something was wrong. The circumstances suggested an unwanted intrusion. Valuables and money remained completely untouched in plain sight, immediately ruling out robbery as a motive. The apartment door showed absolutely no signs of forced entry, which suggested she may have known the person involved or that someone had gained access through deception or subterfuge. The investigation that followed pursued several different leads with varying degrees of intensity. Investigators learned that Bauerdorf had been receiving persistent and unwanted attention from someone she'd encountered while volunteering at the Hollywood Canteen, attention that had made her uncomfortable enough to mention to friends. Her car, a distinctive vehicle, was found abandoned in a different part of the city hours later, suggesting someone had used it afterward and then discarded it. Despite these promising investigative threads and her family's wealth and social connections, no arrest was ever made in the case. The investigation gradually lost momentum and eventually went cold, filed away with thousands of other unsolved cases. Over the subsequent decades, various researchers, investigators, and true crime authors have developed theories about what happened. Some have suggested possible connections to other unsolved cases of young women from the same time period, pointing to disturbing similarities in circumstances. Others have focused intensively on the canteen connection, noting that Bauerdorf regularly interacted with thousands of service members from across the entire country who were in Los Angeles only briefly before shipping out to war zones, making them nearly impossible to track down for questioning. What strikes observers even today is how a young woman from such a prominent, wealthy, and well-connected family could experience such circumstances without any resolution whatsoever. Her family's considerable wealth and social influence didn't translate into answers or justice. The case simply faded from public attention as the war continued and other tragedies took precedence, and the person responsible was never identified, never questioned, never held accountable. William Desmond Taylor was a successful director of silent films during Hollywood's earliest and most pioneering years. By 1922, he had firmly established himself as a respected and sought-after filmmaker with an impressive body of work. On the evening of February 1, 1922, Taylor said goodnight to his neighbor, actress Edna Purviance, and entered his comfortable bungalow on Alvarado Street in the Westlake area of Los Angeles. The next morning, his valet, Henry Peavy, arrived for work and found Taylor unresponsive on the floor of his study. Initially, both the valet and the doctor, who was quickly summoned, believed it was natural causes, perhaps a heart attack given Taylor's age. However, when the body was carefully moved in preparation for removal, they discovered to their shock that Taylor had experienced something far more sinister, a detail that had somehow been missed in the initial cursory examination. What followed was less a proper criminal investigation than an absolute circus of contamination and confusion. Before police could properly secure the scene and begin professional evidence collection, studio executives arrived at the bungalow and reportedly removed numerous items, including personal correspondence, photographs, and other materials they deemed potentially embarrassing to the studio or its contract players. These items were never recovered, cataloged as evidence, or seen again, representing a catastrophic loss of potential investigative leads. Neighbors and studio employees provided conflicting accounts to investigators, many of which shifted noticeably over the following days and weeks. As the inquiry progressed, it became clear that Taylor had been romantically involved with more than one actress at the same time, creating a complex situation marked by tension, secrecy, and personal conflict. Investigators also uncovered that Taylor had deliberately concealed parts of his past, including an earlier life in New York, a wife and child he had left behind, and possible financial complications that had never been fully explained. Attention eventually turned to Taylor's former valet, Edward Sands, who had been dismissed months earlier for theft. Records revealed that Sands had a long criminal history and had previously forged checks using Taylor's name. He became a key figure of interest, yet despite extensive nationwide searches, he was never located. This absence fueled speculation that he may have fled the country or started a new life under a different identity. Despite numerous theories and intense public interest, no arrests were ever made. The case attracted enormous media attention, much of which proved damaging to Hollywood's carefully constructed image, at a time when the industry was already under heavy scrutiny from moral reformers and religious organizations. Several individuals connected to Taylor, including actresses associated with him, saw their careers suffer lasting harm as a result of the scandal. Over time, the official investigation quietly faded without resolution and was ultimately left unsolved. In the decades that followed, various authors proposed competing explanations, pointing to jealous relationships, financial pressure, or professional rivalries. Yet none of these theories were ever confirmed by authorities. What historical records strongly suggest is that, in the chaotic aftermath, protecting reputations and controlling public perception may have taken priority over preserving evidence and uncovering definitive answers. The Hollywood sign, originally erected in 1923 as Hollywoodland, was built as a real estate advertisement in the hills above Los Angeles. By 1932, it had evolved into an internationally recognized symbol of the film industry and the aspirations associated with it. That same year, Peg Entwistle arrived in Hollywood with legitimate stage experience and proven talent. She had performed successfully on Broadway and had recently secured what appeared to be a promising studio contract. However, her first film failed to gain positive attention. Her contract was not renewed as expected, and she soon found herself waiting for opportunities that never seemed to arrive in an industry overwhelmed with aspiring performers. On the evening of September 16, 1932, Entwistle told her uncle that she was heading out to meet friends. Instead, she walked alone into the hills near the Hollywood sign. The following day, she was found at the site, along with personal belongings and a brief note. Authorities concluded that there was no evidence of external involvement, and the case was closed shortly thereafter. In the days that followed, deeply tragic details emerged. A letter arrived at her home, offering her a leading role in a stage production, an opportunity that suggested her career might soon have regained momentum. The timing underscored how narrowly hope and despair can exist side by side. Further examination of her life revealed a recent marriage and divorce that appeared to have been emotionally challenging. At the same time, journalists were increasingly questioning the studio system's treatment of young performers, highlighting how unrealistic promises and unstable contracts often created crushing pressure and uncertainty. Although the official conclusion has never been disputed, Entwistle's story has come to symbolize the emotional toll of Hollywood's unforgiving structure. Her experience remains a powerful reminder of how an industry built on dreams could also leave individuals isolated, overwhelmed, and unseen at the moments they needed support the most. Her story became symbolic, a cautionary tale about Hollywood's broken promises that was repeated in acting classes and discussed in industry circles for decades afterward. Karen Kupcinet grew up in Chicago as the daughter of Irv Kupcinet, a well-known and influential newspaper columnist with connections throughout entertainment and politics. She had advantages that many aspiring actresses completely lacked, including family connections, financial support, and access to industry insiders. By 1963, she had appeared in several television shows and seemed to be building a sustainable career. On November 28, 1963, just 6 days after President Kennedy's assassination, had dominated every news outlet in America. Kupcinet's neighbors in her West Hollywood apartment building reported not seeing her for several days, which was unusual given her normally visible routine. When police entered her apartment, they discovered that something terrible had happened. The medical examination revealed deeply troubling circumstances. The investigation revealed concerning details. She had visible marks that were entirely consistent with a non-accidental scenario, indicating something unfortunate had occurred. The apartment showed absolutely no signs of forced entry, suggesting she had admitted someone she knew. There was no evidence whatsoever of theft or robbery. Investigators learned that Kupcinet had been involved in a turbulent romantic relationship that friends described as emotionally volatile. They also discovered that she had placed several strange, rambling phone calls to family members in the days preceding, calls that were never fully explained and whose content was never completely revealed publicly. Despite all these concerning elements pointing clearly toward something more than an accident, no arrest was ever made in the case. The investigation generated substantial publicity because of her father's prominence and connections in journalism and entertainment, but that visibility and influence didn't translate into resolution or justice. Various theories have circulated over the decades, including speculation about whether what happened might have been somehow connected to the Kennedy assassination, given the proximity of timing. Some researchers have pointed to the fact that this occurred during unprecedented national upheaval and mourning, and suggested her case received less sustained investigative attention than it would have under normal circumstances. Others have focused exclusively on her personal relationships and the volatile romantic situation. What remains absolutely uncontested by anyone is that a young woman experienced tragic circumstances in her locked apartment, and the person responsible was never identified or charged. Her father, devastated and frustrated, spent years trying unsuccessfully to get the case reopened and reinvestigated, writing columns about it and using his media platform, but was ultimately unsuccessful in generating renewed official interest. Natalie Wood began acting as a young child, and by adulthood had become one of Hollywood's most recognized and bankable stars, known for both dramatic and romantic roles. By 1981, she was married to actor Robert Wagner in their second marriage to each other and was actively working on a new film project. Over Thanksgiving weekend that year, Wood, Wagner, the yacht's captain Dennis Davern, and Wood's co-star Christopher Walken took a yacht trip to Catalina Island off the California coast for what was supposed to be a relaxing holiday weekend. On the night of November 28th, the group had been drinking wine throughout the evening, and according to various accounts, there were rising tensions aboard the yacht related to Wood's working relationship with Walken. The specifics of what actually occurred that evening have never been clearly and definitively established, because the people present have provided differing and sometimes contradictory accounts over the years. At some point during the night, Natalie Wood went missing from the yacht. Her body was discovered the next morning in the water near the yacht, wearing a nightgown, socks, and a down jacket. A small, inflatable dinghy that had been attached to the yacht was found nearby, floating separately. The initial investigation conducted in 1981 concluded with an official determination of accidental circumstances. The theory presented was that Wood, perhaps trying to secure or retie the dinghy which was making noise against the boat, had somehow fallen into the dark water. The examination noted that she had consumed alcohol and also had taken prescribed medication. The case was officially closed, and for 3 full decades it remained closed with no official questions raised. However, in 2011, new information and renewed public interest led authorities to make the highly unusual decision to reopen the investigation. The yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, came forward publicly with a substantially different account of that evening, suggesting there had been a serious argument between Wagner and Wood, and that Wagner had not responded appropriately or quickly enough when Wood went missing. Other witnesses on nearby boats also came forward after years of silence with statements about hearing concerning sounds that night, including a woman's voice. In 2012, reflecting the results of renewed investigation, the official classification was formally amended to reflect undetermined factors. This significant change reflected investigators' professional inability to completely rule out certain possibilities about the sequence of events. In 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest in the ongoing investigation, a designation meaning authorities believed he possessed relevant information about the circumstances, but was not being directly accused of wrongdoing. Wagner has consistently maintained that Wood's passing was a tragic accident. He has stated that he and Walken were engaged in conversation in the yacht's salon when Wood apparently retired for the evening, and that he naturally assumed she had gone to their sleeping cabin. When he discovered she wasn't there and noticed the small dinghy was missing, he assumed she had taken it to go ashore to the island. Critics of this account point out numerous problems. Wood was well known among friends and family to be genuinely fearful of dark water, making it extremely unlikely she would have voluntarily taken a small boat out alone at night. They also note the significant time that elapsed between when she apparently went missing and when help was actually summoned. The conflicting witness accounts have never been reconciled. The case officially remains open. No criminal charges have been filed against anyone. The exact sequence of events has never been definitively established to anyone's satisfaction. Jayne Mansfield became famous primarily for playing a specific type of character, but the carefully crafted public persona concealed genuine intelligence, business acumen, and serious professional ambition. By 1967, Mansfield was 34 years old, working steadily performing in nightclubs across the country to support her 5 children and maintain her lifestyle. On June 28, 1967, she performed at a nightclub in Biloxi, Mississippi. After the late performance concluded, around 2 a.m., she got into a car with her boyfriend Sam Brody and her driver Ronnie Harrison for the overnight trip to New Orleans, where she had an early morning television appearance scheduled for later that day. At approximately 2:25 a.m., On a dark stretch of U.S. Highway 90, northeast of New Orleans, the car struck the rear of a tractor-trailer truck that had slowed dramatically or possibly stopped because of mosquito fogging equipment being operated on the road. The impact was absolutely catastrophic and immediate. The 3 people in the front seats passed away instantly in the collision. 3 of Mansfield's young children, who had been asleep in the back seat, miraculously survived with various injuries. The official investigation classified it as a traffic accident caused by the driver not seeing the truck in time due to a combination of fog from the pesticide spraying and darkness on the unlit highway. The official report noted that the driver may have been traveling at excessive speed for the conditions and that visibility was severely poor. However, several aspects of the accident and its investigation have generated ongoing questions and speculation over the decades. There were unconfirmed reports from some sources that the driver had been drinking earlier in the evening, though this was never definitively established through testing. The speed of the vehicle has been estimated differently by various accident reconstruction sources, with some suggesting speeds much higher than initially reported. Some investigators found it genuinely puzzling that an experienced professional driver on a straight road wouldn't have been able to see or avoid a large truck even in significantly reduced visibility. Serious questions were raised about why the truck was positioned in that particular location and whether proper safety warnings and lights had been provided given the fogging operation. Additionally, there were persistent but completely unsubstantiated rumors that Mansfield had been receiving warnings, though no credible evidence was ever presented to support this theory. The investigation concluded quite rapidly, and what occurred was attributed to a traffic accident caused by poor visibility and driver error. The case has never been officially reopened or reinvestigated, despite periodic calls to do so. Hollywood sold an illusion to millions. It promised that talent, beauty, and determination would inevitably be rewarded. But behind the perfectly lit sets and carefully staged publicity photos, there existed another reality. A reality where circumstances occurred that authorities couldn't or wouldn't fully investigate. Elizabeth Short never received justice despite one of the largest and most publicized investigations in Los Angeles history. George Reeves's case was accepted and closed within mere hours. Thelma Todd's situation was officially called an accident despite numerous contradictory elements. Bob Crane's friend was tried and acquitted, leaving the fundamental question unresolved. Georgette Bauerdorf's case went cold despite concerning evidence and family resources. William Desmond Taylor's scene was contaminated before proper examination could occur. Peg Entwistle became a lasting symbol of Hollywood's crushing psychological pressure. Karen Kupcinet's case remains completely unsolved. Natalie Wood's accepted explanation unraveled decades later. And Jayne Mansfield's accident was closed so quickly that legitimate questions never received thorough examination. These are not obscure cases involving unknown people. These were prominent individuals whose circumstances generated significant publicity and public interest. Yet, for all that attention, for all that media coverage, answers remained frustratingly elusive. In some cases, investigations seemed to be actively discouraged or deliberately disrupted. In others, evidence pointed in directions that were never fully explored or explained. These 10 cases represent only what surfaced publicly enough to remain in the historical record. They show a clear pattern of how investigations either failed to reach conclusions or reached them with suspicious quickness. These families never received the answers they deserved. You've now looked at what Hollywood preferred to keep quiet, what the industry hoped would be forgotten. These things happened. These investigations failed or were abandoned. The question that remains is what we choose to remember and acknowledge about Hollywood's history now that we know the complete truth.